Castle at Fort Totten Park, home of the Bayside Historical Society. My name is Paul DiBenedetto. I'm the president of the Bayside Historical Society. I'm glad you all made it out tonight. We're having I believe it's the last of the debates, Phil, that's not true? One more, the second to last of the debates. And it's been a really interesting campaign, to say the least. A lot of great candidates. So I'll give you a rundown of how we're going to run it. We're going to have introductions first, then Yating Liu from the New York League of Conservation Voters will come up and speak, and Nadezhda Williams from the Historic Districts Council will come up and speak. Tonight's theme is about preservation, and about landmarking, and about land use, and so hopefully you'll focus your questions somewhere around that. A 2-minute opening statement comes from each candidate, then 2 questions each from the 2 co-sponsors, with each candidate receiving a 2-minute response time for each question. Questions from the audience, those will be on index cards that you filled out. Hopefully you're still filling them out. Henry has some more in the back there. If you want one, please raise your hand. There'll be a rebuttal time with 2 minutes each for each candidate. Then there'll be 2-minute closing statements for each candidate. And that'll bring us to around 9:30, hopefully. So let me tell you a bit about the Bayside Historical Society. We've been in existence since 1964. This building you're in is a landmark building. It was restored in the late 90s. Took a lot of effort, a lot of work. This whole district, this is a historic district that you're in right now. Most of the buildings in the park are landmark buildings. So that's why landmarking is so important, because a building like this could never be rebuilt in modern times. Impossible. So it's very close to our mission. I'm going to bring up Yating Liu from the New York League of Conservation Voters.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Yating Liu. I am with the New York League of Conservation Voters. Thank you all so much for having us here tonight and welcoming us into your community to co-sponsor the Candidates Forum. Thank you, Paul and Henry, for reaching out to the League. We're absolutely thrilled to co-sponsor this event. Just briefly, the New York League of Conservation Voters, we educate, engage, and really try to activate New York City voters around issues of environmental conservation and sustainability. It's a huge election year in New York City. Our goal, we've been doing these candidate forums all over the city in every single borough. We are also keeping track. Once these elected officials come into office, we do legislative scorecards and sort of keep track of where they are and their voting record on environmental issues. So I look forward to continuing this partnership once we have a council member elect in this district. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Nadezhda Williams from the Historic Districts Council.
Good evening. Just been said, I'm Nadezhda Williams from the Historic Districts Council. We were out here 4 years ago for the Candidates Forum and was very impressed by the turnout, and I'm equally impressed this evening. So thank you so much for coming and for having us part of this too. For those of you who don't know the Historic Districts Council, we are the citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods. We, along with 500 community groups, including Bayside Historical Society, work to ensure the preservation of significant historic resources. We also uphold the integrity of the landmarks law and further the preservation ethic. So we're thrilled to be part of this night, which will discuss such things. Thank you.
I just want to say, if you could please turn your cell phones off, put them on vibrate. Thank you. Okay, so I believe we can move on to the opening statements. Oh, and quickly, I want to thank Henry Euler. Where are you, Henry? He organized this whole event. He did everything. And I also want to thank our staff from VHS for coming out and helping. And also, and Carol, too. Yeah, Allison and Susan, thank you very much, and Carol as well. I said Susan. So I believe we're going to start with a 2-minute opening statement from each candidate. not here. I'm not really sure why. Do we have a reason, Henry?
Mr. Malone sent us an email that he couldn't be here tonight. One of his clients passed away, and he had to go to meet with the family to make the arrangements for the funeral. We regret not being able to come.
Thank you, Henry. So I believe we'll have our 2-minute statement, and we'll start with Chrissy.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to all who helped put this forum together tonight. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. So I'm going to start out by just introducing myself and a little bit about me. My parents bought our house in Auburndale 51 years ago when I was 6 months old. It's the only place I've ever lived in Auburndale. I went from a house, my parents' house, to buying a co-op just a few blocks north, and then eventually my first home on 171st Street in Northern Boulevard. I am married, I have 2 grown children. It is my first time that I am running for office. My business experience has been 31 years with pretty much the same company. I started out at AT&T Long Lines, Lucent Technologies, and then finally retiring after 31 years from Avaya. I became very active in the community about 8 years ago when we were having trouble within the Auburndale community due to businesses, overdevelopment. And we sought a lot of help from elected officials, and it was one elected official's advice who said, start your own civic association. So together with Rhea O'Gorman and a few others from our neighborhood, and I think Rhea is in the back, we started what was called the Station Road Civic. The Station Road Civic has been a very, very active civic association for 8 years. We fight overdevelopment, we do quality of life issues, but more importantly, it is a civic that is successful because we were able to partner with so many other civics in Northeast Queens. So it's working together that we got the results. Public safety, as many of you know, is a very, very big topic for me. 6 years ago, I became the president of the 109th Precinct Community Council, and I take that role very, very seriously. I work with the police department 2 to 3 days a week at least in constant communication. And what I found in public safety is, and also with my civic, is that there was a lack of communication within the community. So through social media and growing up in a communications firm, I found different ways to communicate with the neighborhood and bring information to you. In public safety, one of the things I used was Facebook, and I will tell you that my posts, especially those where I post about crime or most wanted in a neighborhood, home invasions, rape, they're read by between 42,000 and 50,000 people. 3 years ago, I took a job with the New York City Council in District 19. My priority and my focus was constituent issues, problems that people were facing. In the 3 years that I was in the council office, we handled over 8,000 constituent complaints, differing from very, very minor to very, very large issues. Oh, I'm over. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beep. I apologize.
Yeah, I'll put the beep by the mic.
I think I got to the 6 o'clock.
Get the card. That's
Good evening, everyone. I'm Austin Shafran. It's an incredible honor, a pleasure to be here at the Bayside Historical Society at the Great Fort Totten. This place has a lot of historical meaning, not just because of where we are and everything that has gone on here, but some personal historical meaning for me. This is the community in which I grew up. I was born and raised about a block and a half from here. I used to come here when I was a member of PS 169 on field trips. I used to play down the block on the Little League field as a member of the Bayside Little League. And this was one of my first assignments when I was working for Congressman Gary Ackerman, speaking with local groups and community members here, working with some of the officers, getting to know the community that I lived in for my entire life, and getting to talk to people who, like me, believe that in the power of public service, that people who love their community can work together to change it for the better. That's a lot of the reason why I'm running for city council. And I think that everyone in here, in this room, recognizes the great quality of life that we have in this neighborhood, but it's also up to us to protect it. And that means stopping the surge of overdevelopment. We don't have to let McMansions, we don't have to let overdevelopers take over, and their corporate lobbyists take over the neighborhoods that we worked hard to build. That means that we have to work even harder to beat them at their game, to make sure that unscrupulous developers stay within their zoning regulation, to take away the tens of millions of dollars in corporate welfare tax breaks that we give to luxury housing developers when property taxes are on the rise in our neighborhood. Give property tax vouchers to homeowners, co-op and condo owners to have some affordable housing in this neighborhood, and make sure that we're not encouraging the development of buildings that are contextually not within the character of our neighborhood. I'll stay within the two. I'll pass it on to my cousin. No,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Austin, and thank you, Paul and Henry. I'm Dennis Safran, not to be confused with Shafran. I'm the Republican candidate, as well as the candidate of the Conservative and an Independent Reform Party, which will be filing tomorrow. My wife, Jane Stewart Safran, who's here somewhere in the back, and I have lived in Douglaston for 15 years, where we've been very active in the community. I'm a vice president of the Douglaston Civic Association. Jane is on the board of the Little Neck Douglaston Historical Society, and was also, and I believe one or two other civic groups. She was also instrumental in bringing a green market to Douglaston. During the 90s and the early part of the last decade, I ran a national public interest anti-crime and quality of life group that worked. We were based here in New York, though we worked on issues nationally. We supported a lot of the anti-crime and quality of life reforms that turned New York around in those days, such as we helped to draft the law restricting the squeegee guys. We helped to both enact and defend the sex shop zoning rules to get sex shops out of residential neighborhoods, away from schools, away from parks. On a statewide level, we helped to pass Megan's Law about notifying you about sex predators in your neighborhood, and Kendra's Law to get the violent mentally ill off the streets and into the treatment they really so desperately need. But I recognize that quality of life goes beyond that. Certainly overdevelopment goes beyond the crucial public safety issues. Overdevelopment is a major issue we face here in Northeast Queens. I've been very supportive of what Paul Graziano did on that in Tony Avella, even though I lost a very hard-fought, narrow council race to Tony. And we also strongly support the environmental initiatives here. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Graziano. A little bit about me. I'm born and bred in North Flushing. I've lived there my whole life. I actually bought the house next door to my parents and a few years ago. And about 20 years ago, I came home from school after graduating from the University of Massachusetts, and I noticed that my neighborhood had changed a lot. And so I began forming a civic organization with actually one of my friends who's sitting in the back there, Tyler Castle, the North Flushing Civic Association, and got involved in the civic life of Northeast Queens. From that, I also ended up teaching myself land use and historic preservation ordinances and law, and ultimately, over the last decade or so, after spending a decade working with civic and homeowners associations to create essentially a wave of organization to change the rules and to get our neighborhoods protected, I actually co-designed the rezonings that have affected about 85% of the 19th Council District, all of the neighborhoods in Northeast Queens. I've also placed 1,330 buildings on the National Register of Historic Places in Broadway, Flushing. I wrote the report for the Douglaston Little Neck Historical Society in 2008 to expand the Douglaston Historic District along Douglaston Parkway, and unfortunately has not been adopted by the current councilman, who refuses to endorse it and threatened to veto it, which is why we've had 2 of the farmhouses destroyed in the last year. I've also been extremely involved with organizations. The Historic Districts Council, I was the president of that organization. Again, no, I don't want to create any appearance of collusion here. From 2007 to 2009, I'm an advisor to the Bayside Historical Society and to the Douglaston Little Neck Historical Society, to pretty much every civic association in Northeast Queens and the rest of the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Good evening. Thank you all very, very much for being here and for inviting us to be here with you. My name is John Duane. I was born and raised in Broadway, Flushing. I bought my home in Little Neck in 1980, and I raised my 3 children there, and I'm happy to report that my youngest daughter just graduated from college this past May, so we're looking at an improved cash flow situation in my house. I've been very involved in our community. When it existed, I was vice president of the Little Neck Community Association. I've been a member of the Westmoreland Association for over 30 years, an active member. I'm a member of the Alley Pond Environmental Center. I'm a member of the Udall's Cove Preservation Committee. I'm a member of the Little Neck Douglaston Historical Society and the Queens Historical Society. And I believe very deeply in the importance of community involvement. I did serve our community back in 1983 and 84 before I had my family in the New York State Legislature. And in that short 2-year period of time, I sponsored 22 bills that became New York State laws. And the one I'm proudest of is the Vietnam Veterans Tuition Assistance Law, which helped hundreds of Vietnam era veterans get a good college education here in New York State. If I'm elected to the City Council, I'm not going to practice law. While I'm in the council, I'm going to focus exclusively on community issues. What I have been doing the last decade is working in consumer advocacy. We represent a group of lawyers around the country, and I represent hundreds of thousands of consumers who have been defrauded by these outfits that claim they do credit counseling and credit repair, but in fact don't do any counseling and don't do any, and take undisclosed fees and leave these poor vulnerable people in a much worse situation than they were when they joined the program. So these are some of my priorities. I look forward to working with all of these groups when I get to the City Council. We do have issues of overdevelopment in this community that we really have to stick together on and work hard on. And I assure you that I will be your partner in the efforts to preserve and conserve in the 19th Councilmanic District.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, I think we'll move on to questions. So we have, Yatin, can you go up first, please?
So, one of the questions from the New York League of Conservation voters is, to you, what is the most pressing environmental or sustainability issue facing District 19? And once elected into City Council, what would you do as a City Council member to address that issue?
Okay. First of all, when I did serve in the State Assembly, I just wanted to note that I had a 100% rating from the New York League of Conservation voters, I'm proud to say. I think clean air and clean water has to be the primary focus. I consider clean air and clean water to be basic, fundamental human rights, and therefore they require our close attention and careful conservation. We have seen the improvement in our water quality in Little Neck Bay over the last few years. When I was growing up here, it was too polluted to swim or kayak there or really do anything. And we've seen, thanks to the infrastructure the city has really invested in, that we now have a much cleaner Little Neck Bay. And we see people kayaking there and canoeing there and swimming there. So that is something that I think it's good to see that we can really, when we commit to these kinds of improvements, we can really make a difference. And that's something that I think we can use to energize ourselves to continue that effort. I very much believe in those issues because one of the things I like to do more than anything else is ride my bike. I was thinking that I don't think I've ever been on the grounds of Fort Totten when I have not been on my bike. So, you know, that's something that, and again, I ride my bike to my house in Little Neck. I go around Shore Road in Douglaston. I unfortunately have to go along Northern Boulevard for a while, but then I get on the Cross Island bike path, and I'm able to ride all the way under the Throgs Neck Bridge and beyond, and then back again. And those are very special moments when I'm able to ride my bike and enjoy the peace and quiet of the fresh air and fresh water that we have here. And so in terms of the City Council, we have to focus on keeping our buildings green. We have to focus on increasing the availability of mass transit out here in Northeast Queens, so we reduce the dependence on the automobile. And I think that when it comes to looking at the future, we have to look at renewable energy resources. I think that's the only way we're going to be able to sustain our planet in a healthy way. Thank you.
Well, there are several things that I think are extremely important in the 19th Council District environmentally, and two of them I'll touch on, which is open space. We have very little, believe it or not, very little public open space, much less than people think that we do. This fort was actually my first victory in 1998 when the city wanted to sell this fort to developers, and the organization that I co-founded called the Fort Totten Conservancy actually helped stop the city from doing that and turning it into a park and a historic district, which my friend John Dwayne enjoys biking in, and so do I, because it's a really incredible place. And in fact, my fiance and I are getting married in this park 2 weeks after the primary, and we're having a reception here, so that should tell you something. It's a very special place. And there are about 100 acres of land that are still both public and private that need to be protected in this district. We are one of the few districts in the city that actually has unprotected, undeveloped land. So between Flushing Airport, the 6 acres that are left in Crest Haven, the former country club, which need to be turned into athletic fields, the remaining property in Udall's Cove, which are currently privately owned, which need to be purchased and brought into what is currently within a park zone but is still privately owned. Those are things that we need to do, as I said, about 100 acres. Another thing we need to do is clean up the waterfront, and I have to disagree with Mr. Dwayne, because actually, having sat on the Douglas Manor Association Water Committee for the last year and a half as a consultant, the tests have come back in the last few months, and the numbers are astronomically bad. They are actually extremely dangerous to be swimming in that water. It is extremely contaminated, and there's some serious problems going on. I can't really divulge everything because the report hasn't been made public. So cleaning up the waterfront environmentally is extremely important. We also need waterfront access, because a lot of our waterfront is private, and it's being destroyed by people who are building on the waterfront. It's created a lot of problems. The Matones, who are big developers, when they developed Crest Haven, actually developed a whole waterfront portion by pulling out wetlands that were there and replacing them with homes and filling them in. So it's a perfect example. Thank you.
First of all, I'm glad to hear that both John and Paul are cyclists, as am I. I regularly cycle through here, and as a matter of fact, if either of them win the primary, I want to challenge them to a bike race, up and down the path, around Fort Totten, and then back. Okay, we're on. And then back over certain selected hills in Douglas and Little Neck, certainly including Ridge Road. I think and we'll settle the election that way. I think the most important local environmental sustainability issue is really overdevelopment. Obviously, John touched on issues such as clean air, clean water that affect us all, but overdevelopment is a particular concern throughout this district. And here in the eastern part of the district, it often is, and I do not say this to belittle it, largely aesthetic. In the western part of the district, it's literally choking those communities, and we see that encroaching here too. But you have development simply beyond what our resources can take. You see this graphically in College Point with the tremendous congestion there, and people don't have access and egress. People just don't have parking. That's becoming a bigger problem in Bayside. I think we've really got to work on that. As I say, I do applaud most of what Tony Avella and Paul Graziano did on downzoning. I would continue that where necessary. I think that's something Tony and I largely agreed on when we ran against each other in 2001. So I think that's probably the major issue. I might agree more with John than with Paul on the issue of the Douglas Manor waterfront. There's a resident there, and my son has swam there. My son was in the sailing program. If I could just share a quick anecdote that maybe puts things in perspective. I know I'm beyond my time. Some of the old-timers in the community told us when we moved in about that growing up in the 60s and 70s, a local pediatrician said that Douglas Manor had the healthiest kids in New York City because they developed all these antibodies to it. So we certainly don't want to go back to that, but I think it does give us some perspective on it.